Hey everyone, welcome to Digital Inclusion Exchange, a podcast by Digital Charlotte, a project of the Knight School of Communication at Queen's University of Charlotte. My name is Andrew Au, Director of Operations.
And my name is Bruce Clark, Executive Director of Digital Charlotte.
My name is Maria Jimenez. I'm Production Coordinator and Senior at Queen's University of Charlotte.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us, whether you're watching us live or perhaps checking out the recorded version of this episode. We are continuing to present information on digital and media literacy and digital inclusion related to COVID-19. And today we're honored to have our guest, Pat Millen, the co-founder and president of E2D. Pat is been a longtime friend and colleague in this space, incredibly knowledgeable on a number of issues. And so we're really thankful to have him here. And just to frame in the conversation for everybody who may be watching or who will be watching, we really want to provide some valuable information to organizations, to government agencies, to corporate social responsibility or philanthropy, for them to be thinking about what they could be doing or how they could be engaged and take action to support communities that we serve during this crisis. So, Pat, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Morning.
We also have Andrew Au, the Director of Operations at Digital Charlotte, and Maria Jimenez, our production coordinator, and a senior at Queens. So we'll all be here together. So, Pat, crazy time to be alive. Just maybe before we get into some of the meat and potatoes of it, how are you doing? How's your family doing? Yeah. What's going through your mind?
Yeah, so no different than so many people's. I have 3 kids. So first and foremost, I had a couple of kids up in college in Ohio that I felt like I needed to get back in the nest. And that successfully occurred with the usual trials and tribulations. I feel like we beat the clock twice. Like one kid would go up there and then get all of his stuff, and then the college would close 24 hours later. Like we were just ahead of the curve. But having everybody here, having everybody for all intents and purposes locked down, it makes me feel more secure for sure.
Mm-hmm. I have a 3-year-old running around. I know Andrew has a young one as well. So we've been obviously trying to continue to work, but it's been really hard also just dealing with everything. Right. So quite a challenge. So for those sort of taking it back a step, for those folks who don't know about E2D, which I can't imagine that there's anybody that doesn't know about E2D yet, but there probably are a few. Can you tell us more about what you do and how you got started, and just kind of give us that overview?
Sure. So you'd be surprised. There, as distributed as we are in the Charlotte area, there are still a lot of people that don't know who E2D is. So E2D actually stands for Eliminate the Digital Divide. And we began about 7 years ago when my daughter, who was 12 at the time, came home from school and said, "Dad, I don't get it. Every assignment we get at this school assumes you have a computer at home. And I know there are a ton of kids at this school that don't have computers because they can't afford them. They can't do this work. And so how can that possibly be fair?" It was a very, very, very perceptive question. And then she looked at my wife and me and she said, "What are we going to do about this?" And it was one of those sort of parental moments where you sit there and go, "Oh gosh, what are we going to do about this?" But it was the perfect question at the perfect time. And we felt like, why don't we just wade into this and see exactly what is a digital divide? How pervasive is it? Is it everywhere, or is it just in downtown Charlotte? So we decided we would just focus on one single elementary school just to see how many families there maybe didn't have access to a computer. Subsequently, we came to find out what I think all 4 of us now know are sort of the rules for digital engagement, which is you have to have a computer and you have to have access to digital broadband one way or another. and you have to have the ability to understand and know what you're going to do with the computer. Just merely having a computer is not enough. The analogy I always use is that if I hand you a violin and walk away and never teach you how to use it, chances are you'll not be making beautiful music on it anytime soon. So we went to one elementary school, and we went to the principal, and he did an assessment at the school and determined that there were 54 families at that particular elementary school that likely did not have computers at home. And it's interesting, the teachers know which kids don't have access. They're the kids that they have to send paper assignments home, and they do not communicate via email with the parents because the parents probably don't have it. So we decided, okay, 54 families, that's, maybe for $300 we can come up with a solution that would be a computer. We have a local cable company here in the town we live in, Davidson. And we figured, you know what, that's 54 families, $300 a solution. That's about 15 grand. Let's go. Let's just go. We can raise that money by sundown. We live in Davidson, North Carolina, for Pete's sake. And the more we thought about it, we thought, man, that's an elegant solution for sure. But it's just a Band-Aid for one particular school, a great Band-Aid nonetheless. But so we decided, all right, we're going to go out and raise that $15,000. But in the meantime, we're going to try to learn more and more and more about what is this digital divide and how does it affect students locally. So that's kind of the origin story, Bruce. There have been a lot of twists and turns since that first school that we have evaluated. We've done work at 150 Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools. Wow. We have over 12,000 laptop computers to families.
That's awesome.
Thank you. We've worked with amazing counselors at school. We've worked with amazing collaborators, and that is really not something to understate. Our work with Digital Charlotte being a perfect example. We have really come to rely on you guys as colleagues as it relates to, well, Bruce, I look to you as you're more of a student of the game almost at the national level from a policy standpoint. I'm doing all I can to understand it sort of at the nexus of opportunity and locally. But this is a small problem, and our current situation with the coronavirus certainly has moved the spotlight onto the situation, and I welcome that. I think there's opportunity in that.
It does feel, I don't know, odd for me at least that being in this work for me over 4 years now, and at oftentimes feeling like a struggle to where does this fit in the hierarchy of needs. And 4 years ago, I remember having a story or a conversation with Carol Hardison at Crisis Assistance, and she laid out in her office a master plan that they had from whenever it was 10 years ago or 5 years ago, and this was what they had told their clients. These are the things that you should consider when you're in a financial crisis. Expenses you should consider cutting. Mm-hmm. And she pulled that list out, and on that list, the second or third thing or the first thing or something, I can't remember what it was your internet. And fast forward to their current plan, or the plan that was when I was in her office, it was one of the things that was now on the list to keep, along with obviously having a working computer. And so we've been sort of trying to wedge this conversation in or connect it with the intersectionality of all the other issues we face as a community, not just here in Charlotte and Mecklenburg and Davidson and Carolina and the United States and the world really, but now it's almost one of the main things that's being talked about. I can't the number of articles just in the last week on this topic of digital inclusion, on technology access, on learning from home and working from home, and what does that mean for folks that don't have it. And so it's a strange feeling, but to your point, we welcome it because this is what we're trying to accomplish, right?
Yeah. So it's so funny that you say that. I was having this conversation just the other day, Bruce, where when we started and you considered the hierarchy of needs, obviously you need to have shelter. You need to live in a secure place where you're not going to get rolled every night. You need food. You need clothing. And yes, back then a computer seemed like, wow, if you could take care of these sort of basic elements, education would certainly be helpful for sure. And we have really gotten away from that. Not that computers are more important than food or medicine, but we also know that food is no longer computers and access are no longer one of those things like, boy, wouldn't it be great if somebody were able to get that. Used to be, it would be optimal if all Charlotteans had access to a computer in their home. We don't talk like that anymore, Bruce. When we write grants now, we really try to make it clear to people that under no circumstances can anyone be successful in Charlotte, North Carolina, if they do not have access to the information that's available on the internet. And we take it very, very for granted, right? Nobody just sits around and goes, wow, do you know that every single book ever written is on the internet? No. More than that. Wow. Do you know that every single cogent notion ever pondered is on the internet? And we'll ignore the fact that every stupid notion is also on the internet. But the truth of the matter is to be successful in this 21st century world, you need to be able to get online to do just about everything. So overnight, I had the great fortune of my accountant, E2D's accountant, sending me an email saying, okay, here are sort of the first 5 steps we're going to want to take on applying for loans from this new stimulus package. All right, the stimulus package wasn't even completed until about 1 a.m. And here I've got my accountant telling me how E2D can execute off this model. If you don't have a computer at home, you don't even know how to really probably file for unemployment. So the basics of what we do every day, all the way up to the more glorious things like watching Netflix or reading books online or things like that, we could go on days and days and days for what families miss if they don't have access. And so now has never been a better time to just say, if we're not helping families get computers and access in their homes, then we cannot say that we're doing all we can to help families thrive in Charlotte, North Carolina.
So let that point sit for a second. That's an excellent point. So you mentioned sort of the way that most organizations in this space look at the three-legged stool of internet access, a device, and the digital literacy skills. When we think about devices right now, obviously a core part of your business, can you sort of talk us through what that process is like? Where do they come from? What does E2D do with them? How do they get out into the hands of community members, sort of broadly? And then also very specifically, what is E2D doing right now to support that? I know it's really challenging, especially we're an hour and 14 minutes into our shelter in place, and it looks, based on the video, that we're all abiding by it by being at home right now. So sort of broadly, and then more specifically, what's happening right now?
Well, first of all, I am, and I say this with tremendous pride, I am an essential employee. I actually do have the ability to drive around in my car with my computers, taking them to the people that need it. And that is apparently unambiguous, which is good. But despite that unambiguity, I have printed something out and put it in my dashboard if I'm challenged in any particular board, or I'll be ready to show off my letter from Homeland Security. So the truth of the matter is the way that we typically have operated on the laptop side is we count on the largesse of corporations locally who, when they typically buy a computer for their employees to use, they're buying it for them to use for 3 to 4 years. And That is the life of a computer in a company. So it doesn't matter whether you're working for Mecklenburg County or you're working for Bank of America, or you're working for Queens, chances are when they get you your first computer, it's for a 3 to 4 year hitch. The question then becomes, what happens to those computers after that 3 to 4 year hitch? Well, you know that you get a new computer at that time. So they send you a box, and it's always very exciting that you get the new computer. What do you do with your old computer? Well, you send it back to your IT department and then never know the story from that moment on. And there's a lot of things that happen to computers when they get to the end of their 3 to 4 year life at a corporation. A lot of them are leased and they go back to leasing companies. A lot of them get sold on the third party sort of wholesaler market. So if Duke Energy uses 20,000 computers and then a company comes in and takes them from Duke Energy often pays them to come and get them. And then that company does what they do. They repackage them, they resell them, they chop them up for the bits and pieces. And there is a line item against that typically. There's a revenue line item. So you take a company like Duke Energy, and I'm not picking on Duke Energy. If anything, I'm begging Duke Energy to add us to their list of things to do. But they're a $60 billion company that might get $100,000 a year on repurposing their retiring technology assets at the end of its life. If that same inventory were to come to E2D, the value that we would put into these computers through our refurbishment process, and by directly putting these computers into the hands of families that need them in this area, would be worth 10 times whatever sort of little minimum revenue stream might emerge from that. And so that's sort of my constant job, is to try to inspire companies to donate computers so that we can refurbish them. Many people know that we're very, very, very fortunate to have Lowe's up here, and a couple miles north of where I sit in Davidson. Lowe's headquarters is in Mooresville, North Carolina. And very early on, I went to Lowe's because we all living in Davidson know people that work at Lowe's. And I went to the one guy at Lowe's at the time who was highest on the org chart. And I said, "Hey, what do you guys do with your computers at the end of their life?" And he said, "I don't know. I'll find out though." And, I figured it would be like so many other conversations I had where it's like, here's why we can't give you our computers. The guy came back and said, "You're not going to believe this, but I can give you 500 laptop computers per year. They're going to be completely empty. There's going to be nothing on the hardware on the drive. You'll have to figure out how to put software on it and get that licensed. But you can have 500 a year." And this was literally at the time where we were trying 54 for that one elementary school back in 2013. And the guy said, "Not only can we give you 500 computers a year, we can do it indefinitely. We give you 500 every single year." So I'm imagining in my mind, calling up on January 1st of every calendar year saying, "Can we come get our 500 computers?" Lowe's, just to be clear though, Lowe's, out of the 12,000 computers that we've distributed since we started this in 2013, Lowe's has given us 8,000 computers. Yeah, they gave us over 3,000 last year. Lowe's is all in. I mean, and it begs the question, if Lowe's can do it, why can't everyone do it? Okay, I know why everyone can't do it, because everyone has a policy. It begs a lesser question. If Lowe's can figure out how to do it, why can't somebody else figure out how to do it? Lowe's is a huge company for sure. But if you go to the banks, if you go to Duke Energy, if you go to American Airlines, if you go to Harris Teeter, if you go to any company that has any level of white collar employee that requires a laptop to do their job, if you go to a law firm, if you go to a consulting firm, if you go to hospital chains, surely somebody out there has the ability to do what Lowe's is doing. Lowe's, before they were giving us their computers, they were basically at the end of the life pulling the hard drives to make sure there wasn't a security problem. And then they were running these computers essentially through a wood chipper. They were getting zero value out of these computers. Now they are changing lives every single week. We get computers for except for the last 2 weeks. They've been kind of busy.
Yeah.
But this is another thing that I think this coronavirus spotlight is going to show is what can we do to make corporations realize that these computers really have the ability to change lives on a daily basis?
You make a great point, and I think just especially for anyone who might be joining us or watching this, is a lot of what we want to do is give people actions they can take, and send a message to your IT team or send a message to whoever is in whoever you think is the appropriate person, and ask that same question: what is our company? What are we doing with our computers? Because of working with you. We had a lab at Queens that was being refurbished, and the source of the was used to purchase the machines. Sort of opened that door, and they slated to be put into that traditional system of commissioning. And it's nowhere near the numbers, but it's just like these simple questions that were asked that then gave us the opportunity to get those machines into the hands of organizations here in Charlotte. One of them being the Charlotte Mecklenburg Library, specifically because of the types of machines they were, that allowed them to then take them and put them into use for another several years, likely. And so, these simple questions, and I think the other piece also that you're obviously good at because you do this, but also for those who might be watching is not only ask the question once, but chances are the first response you're going to get is going to be sort of we have this policy. And so the follow-up is, well, why do we have that policy, or what can we do to change that policy?
Right.
So when we think of, go ahead, Pat.
No, I was going to say, Bruce, you're absolutely right. The first response, it's really funny. It's kind of like it gets banged back and forth across the court. So I'll go to a good person at a good company and say, hey, what do you guys do with your computers when you're done with them? You know what we're trying to do for E2D. You know what we're trying to do for students and for families locally. And the people that I talk to initially all say, oh my gosh, we have so many computers. We definitely should try to help you guys out. This is really, really great. Too often, those are people that have nothing to do with that supply chain, but they sit there and understand immediately how those computers could have a great effect. It's easy to understand, right? Old computer, refurbished computer, transformed lives. That person typically goes back into the organization and starts digging around. Who do I need to talk to? I need to talk to IT. Do I need to talk to procurement? Do I need to talk to security? Because there are a lot of reasons why people fret about giving away their computers. But at this point, the well-meaning guy comes back to me and says, well, I looked around and we simply are unable to give you any of our computers. We have a policy. It's been in place for a while, but our policy is we cannot give you our computers. Okay. Who wrote that policy and how long ago was that policy written? Well, that policy was written 15 years ago. So before E2D existed. So we certainly weren't part of that discussion. When they were considering their policy. They didn't say, okay, should we try to shave a little off for E2D? Two, there's one particular bank in this town, pretty large one, that went back and said, all right, there's no oral history as to how this policy came to be. None of the people that were on that policy committee work for the bank anymore. There's very little documentation as to how they wrote this decision 15 years ago. But generally speaking, it's related to regulatory reasons. Reasons is typically a phrase that's given to somebody outside of that part of the bank that's sort of like, oh, it's regulatory, like it's meaningless, there are no regulatory reasons that you cannot donate a computer to E2D. There are absolutely fantastic and important reasons why you shouldn't give your computers to E2D without accommodating a lot of very important things, like the security of the information that are on those computers. So, for those of you on this call, I presume you know what a computer is. I presume you know what a hard drive is. So, to anybody that comes back to E2D and says, we can't give you our computers because our data is so sensitive and we're very, very regulated as an industry, I say, hey, I got an idea. Why don't you take out your hard drives, you keep them, you destroy them, you do whatever you'll do with them. You keep the brain and you give me the body. You give me the rest of the computer. There's no such thing as the ghost in the machine. If you've got the hard drive, there is no regulatory issue. Not that there really is in the first place, but there's no threat to your security if you keep your hard drives. And while you're at it, you keep the brain, you give us the body, and then why don't you give us a grant to go buy some more brains? We can go together and go buy some more hard drives, because when you buy hard drives, you buy tens of thousands of them. And when I buy hard drives, I go on eBay and buy them in lots of 20, and they cost me $35 a piece. You call up your computer supplier and say, I'd like the same thing. And they'll be like, okay, we're not even going to charge you this time because you bought 82 million computers from us last year. We'll get you.
Which is a great role for philanthropy to play here, is helping bridge those connections, right? So perhaps the company is willing to give you the body and maybe even a grant, but also a role for philanthropy to work with companies to help think about how they might be able to drive that funding to support the mission of E2D, to help put the brain back in that body, kind of using that analogy. Yeah. But I think just to jump to it, Andrew, I think you had a follow-up question on that.
Yeah. So you had mentioned that when you get the machines, you might not have the brain, or that you might have them just be wiped clean. And even with the hard drive, they might be wiped clean, and you have to install an operating system. How do you manage to take all those, let's say the Lowe's laptops, how do you manage to take that giant lot? Like, what do you do with them next?
Yeah. So we had, until 2 weeks ago, we had 4 computer labs on high school campuses in Charlotte. And that was kind of always our secret sauce. We love the fact that our workforce were high school students. We have labs at West Charlotte High School, Garinger, South Mac, and Olympic High School. And so we have kids that would go after school. They were, this was not an after school program. This is not a computer club. This is a job. So we would hire them. We have dedicated space at each one of those campuses. They would come for 3 hours a shift, 3 shifts a week, and they would work of refurbishing and re-imaging these computers, which is putting new software, operating software, onto these hard drives, these blank hard drives. An amazing model, such a great model, because you're also doing workforce development. You're teaching kids about IT, but not to be underestimated, we also pay these kids 2 times minimum wage. So we pay them a lot of money, and that's an important part of what we do. And, another business model might not require somebody to be paid for that. People would be like, no, I'd love to do this work just for the experience or just for my college application. A lot of the kids that we work with probably won't go to college, but when they leave E2D at the end, they are prepared to go work in an IT profession immediately. And a lot of our kids get hired right out of high school and start $40,000 a year jobs. It's actually kind of been funny lately. We've got lots of companies saying, okay, you're going to have a dozen kids graduate this spring. We'd like to go ahead and offer every one of them a job, like not even have to interview them. Like we want all of your kids. I'd very politely have to say, yeah, you're going to get in line. They're going to interview a few companies and they're going to pick one. But the work of what we do, Andrew, is we get these computers in and they come to us in basically one of three states. They're computers like the ones that we get from Lowe's. We know are perfect. We know we're going to be able to refurbish them. We get in some computers that are quite old. And, if they ran Vista or XP and they were manufactured before 2010, they probably are not going to make it today in terms of what it requires. We can still make a pretty average Linux kind of computer with a very old computer, but there's a certain age where we kind of cut it off. So we get in computers that we know we probably can't use, and then we get in a lot of computers where we have to figure it out, and we get in a lot of computers that are incomplete. So we'll get in computers that don't have any batteries, or we'll get in computers. My new thing right now is power supplies. I got in 250 Dell computers, really good ones, 5450s, 7470s from Carolina Caterpillar, but they had no cords, no power supplies. So I have to go out and buy those in the marketplace, and that's not my favorite thing to do. But every one of these computers is killer. It's really funny because it's coming from Carolina Caterpillar. They come into our labs and we have to open them up and blow out brick dust. I mean, they've been used, these are real, this is not like somebody in Lowe's corporate headquarters with gloves on using these computers. These computers have been used hard. They've got bacon grease on the keyboard, but that's part of our refurbishment process, is cleaning them out, imaging the software, making sure that everything is updated through Microsoft, making sure that everything has a quality control before we send them out.
And then there's organizations like Digital Charlotte who are running earned device digital and media literacy training programs in the community. Come to E2D, purchase those from you. My favorite is for at least from a Digital Charlotte perspective, one of my favorite stories, I should say, is running a program that was led by Charlotte Works, our workforce development agency here, who's doing some incredible work even right now and helping folks find new jobs who might be laid off because of this. But they also support some of our programming, and we run a week-long digital literacy basics program inside the Mecklenburg County Detention Center, working with residents there. And I think we've run maybe 5 or 6 of those sessions and trained just shy of 100 residents of the detention center. And in one of the sessions, I really enjoy telling the story of E2D and where these computers come from, because many of the residents there have kids who are in CMS and have they appreciate it. Many of them graduated from some of these high schools that you're mentioning. And so one of the sessions that one of the gentlemen turned around and said, is this at West Charlotte High School? I said, yeah. And he said, my son works in that lab. And to think about that cycle of a community coming together, right, of probably a Lowe's computer based on the numbers, right? So that person at Lowe's who made that decision, who worked with you to get that computer into a reimage lab, that, like you said, a workforce development angle, a student in CMS getting paid 2 times minimum wage, and that computer coming back into the same community. And we think about the turnover and the value of that $1 or that one computer as it turns over multiple times in our own community. It happened before this crisis, but is really highlighted and representative of what we could be doing and can continue to do, especially for those who are watching and they think about supporting organizations like E2D. This is the kind of thing that happens when we think about creative ways to support our community. And now that resident who has likely since been released, who has that computer, can use that to create the next level of opportunity in his life, whether that's applying for a job. I know that some of the things we talked about with them, the things that they wanted to do, stay connected to family who's not there, is really powerful. So I'm just sort of feeling energized because I remember that moment and how impactful it was to hear that sort of a wow, that just comes full circle.
So I think that's the word that you use, is impact. To not have a computer and get a computer, wow, there's impact there. but to change the trajectory of somebody who's been in jail that is going to be released from jail and very likely back within the same world from which temptation possibly led them astray prior to that. A computer opens up a whole new set of opportunities, a whole new set of possibilities. You don't have to go back to the same thing with all of a sudden now you have a computer. It opens up your world to jobs. It opens up your world to information that you never even knew existed. So this all comes down to impact. I'll tell you a little bit about impact real quick, Bruce. We have one other lab that's not on a high school campus at our headquarters up in Cornelius. And so we have been running that lab basically, at warp speed since the other 4 labs out of necessity had to close. We very safely and 3 to 4 people per day working very separated from one another, gloved up and masked. And we've got that one lab is probably cranking out about 80% of the inventory that the collected labs would have been doing prior to this. But yesterday we delivered 112 computers that had been built at this lab in the last week, 92 down to Walter G. Byers K-8 school, which is over off of Statesville Road, and then another 20 to Sonia Jenkins, who's the head of the federal McKinney-Vento program, which is the program that supports homeless families within CMS. So CMS has been on a dead sprint since they had to let school out, because the only way that anything's going to happen academically, it's going to be online teaching and learning. Mm-hmm. So the need for kids to get computers just to be able to interface with the school and do their work is absolutely paramount. But think about those 2 sources that got computers yesterday. The 20 kids that got assigned through E2D, these are all homeless kids. These are kids that don't have the ability to shelter in place in their bedroom and while the day away doing a little bit of schoolwork and doing a lot of Netflix and YouTube. These are kids that have to find their access wherever they can get it. They can't get it at the library because the library is closed. Except really resourceful kids are going to go up to the library anyway and sit on the outside of the building and use the halo of the internet from inside.
Which is a good point, just to make that the library did leave on their Wi-Fi hotspots or their Wi-Fi in the buildings so that if it penetrated outside, people could come, which is a little bit in question now with their shelter in place. But just a shout out to the library for being courageous and making that decision.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of creativity out there. I was on the National Digital Inclusion Alliance call yesterday, Bruce, and it's inspirational listening to other communities around the United States trying to figure out how to cope with all of this. The Byers computers, just to finish that up real quick, Byers is a school that's 21% homeless kids because it's really close to the shelters. And so these are computers. The principal at Walter G. Byers is a guy named Anthony Calloway, and he is one of these damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead kind of principals. He does not play around. First thing that happens is they close down the schools. The second thing that happens is he's rolling 5 carts of Chromebooks over to the Salvation Army. These families have access to use computers immediately. That's the kind of life in wartime reaction that I hope that Charlotte is really going to continue to embrace. It's like, do we need to sign out these computers? What sort of signatures do I need to have on these forms to get them? No, we don't have time for that. Get the computers to the people that need them. We'll worry about the details later. Mm-hmm. Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools right now shouldn't be saying this in a public forum. What they are doing in terms of just banging out computers and saying, we'll figure the rest of this out later, is I just have mad respect for Derek Root and Ernest Winston and the school board for just saying, no, get the computers out. Hopefully we'll get them back. But right now, what's important is we need to get them out. God, that's beautiful. And it's so beautiful that they're not getting hung up on that bureau.
Speaking of CMS, a fantastic announcement, I believe it was last week now, about a partnership between the CMS Foundation and E2D. Anything you can share with us today about that?
Yeah, so access is the big whammy for families. If we can get a lot of kids computers, that's great. But if they can't get them if they can't get online from home, that's really hard. So over the years, CMS has had a very nice relationship through Sprint, through something called their 1 million program, where high school students have all been able to get these digital hotspots that they can use. The digital hotspots are pretty slow, and they don't come with a lot of fast data. But boy, they're very important. They're better than nothing for sure. But as our country came walking into this crisis, the next thing you know, millions and millions and millions of Americans that didn't have access in their homes, or who don't have homes that they control, either because they're homeless or because they live with somebody or because they live in a complex where all of digital inclusion is handled by the landlord who charges 5x for what Spectrum might put into the complex. Everybody in the country needed hotspots. And so it just so happened I had a conversation with Sprint about a month before any of this had happened, before any of us had anticipated this. Sprint had granted E2D sort of a private license to get an allocation of up to 6,000 hotspots, which frankly at the time seemed kind of funny because there wasn't like we were going to burn through 6,000 hotspots anytime soon. Well, when the virus hit the fan, I called CMS and said, I've got up to 6,000 hotspots. We need to get them to these families. And I certainly can't afford them because each one, the device was free, but you had to buy 6 months of unlimited data for $22.99 a month. So it was like $275 or something. But you got 6 months of unlimited data. So I went to CMS and said, all right, 6,000 of these times this equals about $835,000. There's state and federal money out there. There are local philanthropic groups that are pulling together. Somebody needs to cobble together a budget to get this $835,000 to at least get these 6,000 units. These have been allocated to me, but every hotspot in the country right now, it's like toilet paper or Purell. They're flying off the shelves. So right now, if I wanted to buy one hotspot right now and call my source that I usually do it with up in Minneapolis, I could get a single hotspot, but it might be late April by the time it would be delivered. And so, long story short, went to Sonia Gant and I got together on a call through the Charlotte Mecklenburg School Foundation, and Sonia said, we're going to put together an appeal for $1 million, of which the 6,000 Hotstar students is a prime part of this appeal. And by God, they raised every dime of it within about maybe 36 hours. It was really amazing. David Tepper, our owner of the Panthers, made a $650,000 gift. The Belk Endowment and the Cannon Foundation made up the difference. And it's incredible. Those hotspots are being delivered right now. And this call I was on with our national association yesterday, we spent a lot of time watching a lot of people shrugging their shoulders saying, man, we would die to get hotspots. We can't find any. We can't source them. A lot of the discussion yesterday was based on, well, we thought we were going to be able to get this deal through this company, but it's going to be 3 months before they can do it. We actually think we have a few more secret stashes, and we know that the 6,000 hotspots are not going to take care of all of the need for Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools students. So as we hear, and I'm spending a lot of time on the phone looking around for hotspots, when we find hotspots, basically Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools let us know, we'll buy every one of them. Which again, life in wartime. If you see it and there's an opportunity there, we'll engineer backward into the solution. Go get the hotspots immediately, and then we'll figure it out later.
Yeah. I mean, I think that just to add that point, there's the immediate need. The hotspots have an opportunity to provide in this immediate need as CM companies and anyone, right? I mean, but in this story, CMS and the students who need internet access along with perhaps a Chromebook or an E2D device. Yeah. I think we also, when we think about our opportunity in this moment, because of this crisis, to drive home the significance of at-home broadband access at minimum speeds, sort of defined by the federal government, is something that everyone in our communities, as we get the hotspots to cover the need now, we also need to think about what does this look like long term, right? And how do we help create a scenario where those families can have service in their home beyond the life of the hotspot, which will sort of be a gap filler, right, until we find other solutions. And so, our government leaders, both here locally at the state level and at the federal level, I think if you advocate in this space, you should be calling them, talking to them. We know at the federal level, the stimulus bill that was signed last night, there's some provision there related to programs like Lifeline that help offset the cost of internet and phones. But other ways that we can be thinking about this as a community, it starts with that phone call to your city council person, to your state representative, to your congressional representative, advocating for this. So just sort of imploring people who are joining us to think about that. I have a few minutes left, and I know Maria might have a question sort of talking about your experience in one of our programs. And so toss it to you, Maria.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to share my experience. Before all of this happened, I was lucky to be able to facilitate one of our digital media literacy classes. And it's a Spanish workshop. It was the first time we were doing this. And I had only one session because then we had to push it to fall, if I'm not wrong. The impact of just one session was incredible. People were just excited to ask questions in a safe environment and just understand what they had in front of them and not be scared to ask. And especially having a language barrier is even harder. So I think we even went over the time and people stay after asking questions, and they were excited that at the end of the workshop, they were going to be able to have a computer because they were telling me how some of their kids are in college and they're in STEM programs. Right. And we know the STEM programs, everything is online, everything is a special software, everything is a lot of homework that they need to be online. And they told me how their kids have to work ahead or have to stay later at school in order to have a computer and do all their homework. So I hope next semester I get to facilitate those classes again because I saw the need and I saw their thirst for knowledge as well.
Maria, you made a point. Yesterday, Maria. You made a point yesterday, Maria, that was a tip. And I'm thinking about organizations again and how we're helping folks think about their role. That when messages are only delivered in English, it requires some translation. And you made a couple points about that yesterday. I wondered if you might share that again today.
Yeah. So I have been realizing how most of our official information about everything that's going on is in English, and even information about technology is moving fast in a language. Pop culture is in a language. You think about it. So I think about my friends who do not live here. I'm from Venezuela. I think about my parents who are in different countries, and this is not their language. Right. So I think there's a need to bring there's a need for the information to be diverse so everyone can understand, because there's a lot of people being kept in the dark about everything that's going on, and they're reaching out to unreliable sources. So I think we have to be aware of how lucky we are to be able to understand everything and have the information so fast at our fingertips as well.
I think everything you said there is so true. One of the things that we figured out really early on is that when you do this sort of one-to-one training, when you're in a position to speak with somebody, you have to really meet them where they are. As I know Digital Charlotte has experienced over time, 20 people will sign up for an internet program, and the 20 will be all over the place in terms of what their base competency is. Yeah. So we'll have somebody come up that has never, put their fingers on a keyboard before, and you have to tell them you have to push this button to make a capital letter. We also have kids that occasionally will come through that say, listen, I've been using computers my entire life. I've never actually had the fortune of owning one. But I'm trying like crazy. I'm taking calculus right now, and I cannot put a 3D image into an Excel spreadsheet. So like the level of digital literacy is really a hyper-localized concept that you have to focus on person to person to person. And we have had, I think, about 38%, 38% of our families are not speaking English first at home. The great majority of them are speaking Spanish, but we have had people from many Asian countries, Africa, and they want this opportunity. They want to be able to communicate with family back home. They want to be able to communicate with their teachers, with the teachers of their children. And Bruce has heard this story before, but the first time a Latina mom that we worked with, packed an email into Google Translate and sent it in English to her son's teacher, fourth grade teacher. It was like the greatest miracle of all time to see this happen, right? That she was communicating with the teacher, but to get a ping back 5 minutes later from the teacher who had reversed the process and had typed a note into Google Translate and sent it to this woman in Spanish. I mean, this is the most incredible thing if you think about it. This is an engagement where parents are now involved with their students' education in ways that never existed before. And so, unfortunately, it almost becomes like a cliche or sort of sappy to talk about individual stories of where there's great impact in terms of digital literacy and what a computer can represent. But I know that all four of us could sit here and tell 50 anecdotes apiece about, the time that this guy figured out that if he just opened up an online banking account instead of taking his check to the check cashing store, that he's basically getting a 50% raise. Because instead of getting 70 cents on the dollar at the check cashing store, he's getting 100 cents on the dollar by depositing it into his banking account. We all have hundreds of stories like that. And that's where the rubber meets the road. Don't you guys agree? I mean, that when you are seeing impact that gives a family 50% more income, I mean, that is just big. That is so big.
Yeah. Speaking of rubber meets the road, what are some things that for people that are watching or listening right now, what are some tangible actions that they can do for E2D? Let's just be specific, right? It's for the Charlotte community here for E2D. You are working on laptops now. Do you need more? Or is there a place that if I have a stack of them right now in my office, where can I drop them off somewhere? I know we have a stay in place, but like, if there's this need and you're essential, like how can I get those things to you?
Yeah. So, I mean, I cannot state this more concretely. We need every computer that we can get our hands on, period. We have been deemed essential personnel, so we will go to you and pick up your computers. You can put them out on your front steps. You will never have to touch us or we you. If you're a corporation, we will rent a truck and drive it to your loading dock, and we will drive away with all of your computers. The truth of the matter is we can use about 80% of the computers that we get in from corporations. Computers that we get from individuals, that's less because people tend to bang on their computers pretty hard. But we need computers so desperately. And we can make a computer, we can take the old and make it new. Stuff that people are sitting there going, I don't think you're going to want these computers. You know, they're like 6 years old. We go, 6 years old? That is like beautiful. 6-year-old computer for us that's where we really do our work. So yeah, you don't want to work with a 6-year-old computer, but we'll get another 5 years of life out of this 6-year-old computer. So that is always not just during wartime and coronavirus, but always getting in computers is what E2D needs to difference. So nothing to announce, but we are in the process of trying to establish a temporary lab in the northern part of just near I-277 in Charlotte, where we will be able to control the space. We will be able to build it in a safe way, but we'll also be able to hire back our cohort from West Charlotte and Garinger to come staff that lab. We want these kids to get back to work. We want them to get back to work because they need the money and they really need the work. But we really want them to get back to work because we need to build computers and get them out into the community. So if this particular space works out, and I really have my fingers are crossed, but I'm feeling pretty optimistic about it. And if we can get some agency to say, yes, this is an acceptable, safe way for people to be able to do this work in a safe and non-contagion kind of way, we'll open that baby up as quickly as we can. We'll get back to building computers as we can. By the way, I've told that story to about 4 different funding sources, and they're all like, me. We want to fund that. We want to pay for everything. Just let us know. You know, and I love that about Charlotte. Charlotte's raising a ton of money right now, and now people are sitting there going, all right, how are we going to spend all this money? Oh my God, E2D is building a lab. We got to definitely support that.
I have a quick question. If someone wants to donate computers, does it matter what type of computer? Can it be a Windows? Does it have to be a Mac? Like,
yeah, well, for E2D, we only take laptops.
Okay.
That makes us very boutiquey compared to some of our colleagues that take anything and everything. We only take laptops for 2 primary reasons. One's a little selfish and one's a little practical. Most of our computers are going to students, so we want them to have the mobility to be able to get around with their laptop computer. But if you think about what the difference is between inventorying laptops and inventorying desktops, desktops are bigger, they take up more room, monitors do not stack easily, keyboards, mice, cords, it's just a pain in the neck. Laptop computers stack like books on bookshelves. They're very, very easy to inventory. We've got right now in our secret hiding place, we have about 900 computers that are in some form of work in progress. And we're pounding those out as quickly as we possibly can. We tend to get mostly Windows-based machines, though, to answer your question. Sometimes we get computers that just won't run it, but we'll open those computers up and we'll pull out the memory, we'll pull out their hard drives, we'll pull out fans, different pieces. So generally speaking, we want everything. We get in a few apples, and we will fix those apples, and then people are like, hey, can I get my hands on this one? People that work for us are like, I really want that computer. They're like, put it to work.
So maybe a couple more, or one last question. If Andrew and Maria, if you have another one, we can sort of use this opportunity to wrap up. But so we talked about philanthropy. Obviously, you mentioned that you're having a lot of people raise their hands. Clearly, opportunity for more people to raise their hands if they want to. So if there's any philanthropic organizations that want to contribute to E2D, I obviously doing a little bit of a sales pitch for Pat, but please reach out to Pat. We'll make sure we get your contact information and share it think is the best way there. Also for them to think about the communities that they work with, that they fund. How are they getting information about digital inclusion resources that can be made available to their communities? We talked about organizations as well, what they can be thinking about, nonprofits in the community who are on the front lines, who are shoulder to shoulder with these community members, or perhaps 6 feet shoulder to shoulder now.
Right.
What they can be doing, especially around information about the low-cost internet plans. Digital Charlotte does have a site up now that is collecting all of the local resources related to digital inclusion, affordable internet access, places you can go, things like that. That's www.digitalcharlotte.org/COVID-19 resources. Is that correct, Andrew?
Yep. It's also on our front page. If you just go to digitalcharlotte.org, it'll be right there front and center.
And talked a little bit about what government agencies can be doing now, elected officials, advocating for affordable broadband deployments in the home, ensuring that we have competitive process and multiple internet service providers to help create a level of competition that makes it favorable for the consumer. Right. This is going to be critical as we think about needs of our community going forward and the new reality we face, right? Even beyond this crisis. But sort of coming back to all of our conversation is about the people of our community, the individual person, the family.
Right.
And so when we think about the people that we're trying to serve, can they sort of, I know the answer, or I suspect I know the answer, but imagine them watching, or imagine these organizations. They can't just come to the front door of E2D and get a computer right now. Is that correct? And how should organizations who need technology right now engage with E2D?
Right. Great question. So when we started this, about 95% of orders went directly to families. We worked with schools. Schools would refer families that they felt had need. We would come to the schools. We'd do a little distribution at the schools. 50 families might get computers. Over time, we're now probably about 50-50. 50% go directly to families. 50% go to organizations that are serving specific populations, whether it's Digital Charlotte, whether it's refugee support services, whether it's Habitat for Humanity. Every Habitat home in Charlotte gets an E2D computer as part of their closing. Before this coronavirus, which has obviously made everybody have to shift everything toward immediately get as much access and as much digital technology out there as possible, a la CMS, like just get them out, deploy. 3 weeks ago, which seems like a million years ago, my mantra was, okay, Charlotte has decided that affordable housing is going to be one of the first things that we're going to act to create better opportunity for families that need to live and work in the Charlotte area but can't afford it. Great. Love that, but totally agree. Okay, Charlotte, y'all have decided that affordable housing is the way to go. How come there's no plan for technology within the affordable housing you're building? So my mantra had been all year long, basically, was like, we need to get computers into every affordable housing complex that exists and that will come online going forward. And so, they opened up, or they took reservations for Mezzanine at Freedom, which is a Charlotte-Mecklenburg housing partnership complex on Freedom Drive, 129 spaces for low-income families to move in. They had 1,000 people standing in the rain trying to get one of the golden tickets. Every one of those has to have a computer in the home. Every one of them. And so every grant we write, again, says, if you give somebody an affordable home but don't give them technology, you've upgraded their address, but they will fail. They will fail. They have to have digital access to be successful in Charlotte, North Carolina in 2020. We're going to get back to that. When this thing finally settles out, wherever it settles out, we're going to have gotten a lot more computers and a lot more access to a lot more students. but we're going to all have to go back to the business that you were just talking about, Bruce, which is making sure that people know that there can be no gaps as it relates to digital opportunity in Charlotte, North Carolina. But more than that, there's no reason why there needs to be a digital gap. The computers that we need to get to these families are there. You just have to have the will to give them to E2D to refurbish. Mm-hmm. The educational opportunity to train people as to how to use these computers is there. It's at Digital Charlotte. It's at Charlotte Mecklenburg Libraries. It's at Goodwill Industries. It's at YMCAs. It is all over the place. We don't have an option. We need to express that to everyone so that everyone is a digital citizen in Charlotte. And then there is that whole punching power that has to exist at the state and national level in terms of access. And we have a fairly hostile FCC right now, but even now they're looking at things going, all right, this is bad. This is really bad. And so even the most hostile people at the FCC that have done no favors for digital inclusion, that even now they're sitting there going, all right, this net neutrality thing maybe does look like that long term is something we're going to have to figure out. So again, some of it seems wonky. It's not. It all has to be conducted at the individual level. If I go to one person and get that one person, that one computer, and that kid doesn't drop out of high school, but graduates, goes and gets a job and goes and lives a meaningful life where he or she can be employed, live in Charlotte. This is how Charlotte becomes the great city that I've always believed that we can be. We're not there, but we can get there. But digital is essential.
A great way to wrap up the conversation. And one last really meaningful piece of information, how organizations, again, who are in Charlotte, who are facing the realities right now and even beyond long-term, who want to get connected with E2D, how can they connect with you? Website, email address, perhaps you want to share that with folks?
Yeah, so I take emails directly. Pat at e-2-d.org. We have probably gotten in 700 requests for computers from this person and that person. Oh my gosh, I've got 2 families at Sterling Elementary. We are taking a waiting list on every one of those. We are trying to encourage them to speak directly to the principals at their schools. We're everything by hand right now, but we are following up on everything. But corporations that are like, you know what? I'm a 5-person accounting company down in the South Park area. We've got 2 computers that we're going to be retiring. We'll come get them. We want them. We want every one of them. Call us.
Pat. Yep. Or email you at pat@e-2-d.org.
Yeah.
Yep. Don't forget the dashes.
e-2-d.org.
Yeah.
If you put into Google E2D eliminate the digital divide, you'll find us. By the way, anybody that happens to be on this that is inclined toward our work, we also need donations of cash. Every computer that we build costs money because we have to buy those hard drives, we have to buy those batteries, we have to buy those power sources. Going to be a lot of people getting $1,200 checks in the next little bit that really don't need them as my kids do. Send us all 1,200 of it.
There you go. Yep. Well, Pat, again, thank you so much for your time. Andrew and Maria, again, always, we appreciate it. And so thank you for joining us on today's episode. And we hope that you follow up on some of the advice that was given here today. Ask additional questions if you're so inclined on social media. We'll be monitoring those. Reach out to Pat, reach out to us. We have a great opportunity in this moment to continue to support our community. And as Pat said, and all of us know, there is a lot of issues, a lot of other opportunities, or a lot of other challenges right now that are facing our communities. And so we want to recognize that we understand that this fits into that scope of challenges, but is really critical for thriving in a modern society, economy, and democracy, especially today. But again, thanks for joining us. We hope you tune into our next episode. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.